Since the conflict in Ukraine started in February 2022, the energy relationship between the EU and Russia has been very tense. Before the conflict, the EU got 40% of its gas from Russia, but sanctions and political unrest messed up this relationship. The EU accused Russia of using energy as a weapon, while Moscow said the problems were caused by sanctions and technical problems. Key pipelines like Nord Stream 1 saw big drops in flow and eventually shut down. Russia also stopped sending gas to countries that didn't pay in rubles, forcing many to look for other options. In response, the EU sped up its efforts to diversify by importing more liquefied natural gas from the US and Qatar and spending money on new infrastructure. These tensions caused gas prices to skyrocket in Europe, reaching an all-time high of over 300 EUR per megawatt hour in 2022, which caused inflation and had a negative effect on both households and businesses. Now this tension has reached a new level. European gas prices go up because Austrian gas supplies are cut off. Before we look at the specifics of this news and how it might affect the EU as a whole, let's take a look at the trade history between the EU and Russia, especially in the years before the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Russia's trade relationship with the European Union has changed a lot since World War II. This is a reflection of larger changes in geopolitics and the economy. After the war, Europe was split into Eastern and Western blocs, with the Soviet Union controlling Eastern Europe. Trade between the Soviet Union and Western European countries was limited, mostly because of ideological differences and mistrust between the two groups. However, in the late 1960s, some Western European countries, including Austria, started buying gas from the Soviet Union. It was just a few months before the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia that Austria became the first country in Western Europe to buy Russian gas. The first agreement between Austria's OMV and the Soviet Union's Soyuz neft export was signed on June 1, 1968. It was a major turning point in East-West economic relations during the Cold War. The contract promised Austria 142 million cubic meters of natural gas every year. Over the next 5 decades, this amount increased more than 64 times, and in 2017, Austria imported a record 9.1 billion cubic meters of Russian gas. Austria's position made it easy for it to be a major hub for moving Russian gas to Western Europe. The Ballgarten under March gas hub, which is near the border with Slovakia, became an important place for sending Russian gas to places like Germany, France, and Italy. Not only did this infrastructure make sure Austria had enough energy, it also strengthened its business ties with both Eastern and Western Europe. The 1968 agreement set a standard for other Western European countries to follow. In the early 1970s, countries like Italy and West Germany made similar deals with the Soviet Union, adding more Soviet gas to Western Europe's energy mix. By the end of the 1980s, Russian gas made up a big part of Western Europe's energy needs. In France and Germany, 15% of all the gas burned came from the Soviet Union. The 1970s were a time of détente between the Eastern and Western blocs, which led to more business contacts. Building pipelines like the DRBA pipeline in 1964 and the Uroe-Pomer-Urad pipeline in the early 1980s made it easier for Soviet oil and gas to reach Western Europe. Even though the U.S. was against it, Western European countries made energy deals with the Soviet Union to increase their energy options. The DRBA pipeline, also called the Friendship Pipeline, has been in use since 1964 and is still one of the largest oil pipelines in the world. It brings oil from Russia to several European countries, including Poland and Hungary. The Urengoy-Palmer-Urad pipeline, which opened in 1984, is a major way for Russia to send natural gas to Europe. It goes through Ukraine. During this time, Western European countries tried to diversify their energy sources by making energy deals with the Soviet Union, even though the United States was against them. These partnerships showed how complicated international relations were at the time, when economic realism often coexisted with political rivalry. The fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 led to the formation of the Russian Federation as an independent state. The 1990s were a time of economic turmoil in Russia, but trade with the EU began to grow. Russia began to import energy resources and export machinery, vehicles, and consumer goods. In 1994, the European Union and Russia signed a partnership and cooperation agreement, which went into effect in 1997. This agreement set the rules for all kinds of political and economic relationships, including trade, investment, and energy cooperation. During the 1990s, the EU became Russia's biggest trading partner, making up a big part of its trade. In 2005, trade between the EU and Russia reached more than 166 billion euros, with Russia's trade surplus equal to about 8% of its GDP, or 50 billion euros. It was the EU's third most important trading partner, making up 7.3% of EU trade. On the other hand, it was Russia's most important trading partner, making up 52.9% of Russia's trade. Russia supplied the EU with energy resources like oil and natural gas, and the EU sent machinery and consumer goods to Russia. Even though there were problems during the switch to a market economy, this trade relationship helped Russia's economy recover in the late 1990s and early 2000s. By the early 2000s, the European Union had solidified its position as Russia's biggest trading partner. In 2008, 52.3% of Russia's foreign trade with energy products came from the EU. Exports to the EU are mostly made up of oil and gas. EU sent 105 billion EUR worth of goods to Russia, and Russia sent 173,000 EUR worth of goods to the EU. Energy and fuel sources made up 68.2% of Russia's exports to the EU. This trade partnership was good for both sides. The EU got a steady supply of energy resources that were important for its economic growth, and Russia got a huge market for its energy exports and bought consumer goods and machinery from the EU. Let's stop for a moment. If you like the movie so far, could you do us a small favor? Clicking the like button helps us reach more people, and leaving comments with your ideas or feedback has an even bigger effect. Thanks for watching. Let's go back to 2014. Crisis in Ukraine and sanctions. When Russia took over Crimea in 2014, ties between the EU and Russia got a lot worse. In response, the EU put penalties in place that target a number of areas, such as finance, energy, and defense. Russia put in place counter-sanctions. Some EU agricultural goods were not allowed to be brought into the country. This caused a drop in trade between the two countries from 2015 to 2021. But it slowly started to rise again despite the ongoing sanctions. In 2020, trade between the EU and Russia began to grow again. Russia's biggest trade partner was the EU, which made up 37.3% of all of Russia's trade in goods. As a result of the conflict, the EU imposed unprecedented sanctions on key areas of Russia's economy in 2022. The EU exported goods worth 79 billion EUR to Russia and imported goods worth 95.3 billion EUR from Russia. Energy products continued to be the main imports from Russia after the conflict. Between the second quarter of 2022 and the second quarter of 2024, the EU put limits on both imports and exports. As a result, exports to Russia dropped by 59%, and imports from Russia dropped by 87%. As we all know, Russia has stopped sending gas to Austria, which is a member of the EU. As a result, gas prices across Europe went up sharply after Austria's OMV said that Russia would stop delivering gas starting Saturday. According to OMV, Gazprom PJSC told Austria of a complete suspension of supplies. This move comes after OMV said it would stop paying the Russian gas giant to get back a 230 million EUR, 242 million arbitration award, the European gas giant. The benchmark contract went up by as much as 2.7%, reversing earlier drops. On November 16th, it reached its best level in almost a year. The supply cut is a big step in Europe's move away from Russian gas. Many countries in the area have already cut their gas imports. Dependence on Moscow's power. Austria and a few other countries still depend on gas that is sent through Ukraine under a transit agreement that ends at the end of the year. Austria will have to get used to not getting Russian gas as soon as expected, which could make problems in an already tight energy market even worse. Since the end of July, gas prices in Europe have gone up about 30%. This is because more gas is being taken out of storage than normal because of the cold weather and less wind energy being produced. Problems with storage and supply. According to Ukraine's grid operator, gas flows through the Suja crossing point on the border between Russia and Ukraine have stayed the same since Saturday. Russian gas goes to Austria through Ukraine and Slovakia. EC Control, Austria's energy regulator, said that officials are keeping a close eye on things because of the high levels of storage and the availability of other transportation routes. The regulator said, "We believe gas supplies for Austrian customers will remain secure." The announcement about Austria's reliance on Russian energy shows the country's deep historical ties to Russian energy. Even though Europe has been moving away from Russian gas in recent years, Austria, along with Hungary and Slovakia, is still one of the biggest importers of Russian gas in 2018. Austria extended a long-term deal with Gazprom for gas until 2040. This will have an effect on the energy markets. The supply cut happens at a time when cooler weather and less wind energy output have caused more gas to be taken out of storage. This could mean that Europe has fewer gas stores later in the winter when demand is usually highest. Peaks. It will be harder to fill up storage tanks in the summer because they will be empty more quickly. This will make summer prices higher than next summer. Winter's conclusion that the future of the EU's gas supply is still very unclear because of rising tensions with Russia. The end of all Russian gas exports to Austria marks a turning point in Europe's energy transition. The EU has come a long way in reducing its reliance on a few main energy sources. Its decades-long reliance on Russian gas has left it open to threats that can't be fixed quickly. The end of transit agreements through Ukraine at the end of 2024 and supply cuts make people even more worried about Europe's energy security, especially during the high-demand winter months. The EU has also started to import liquefied natural gas from other countries, like the US and Qatar. But this strategy is not without problems. It has become clear that LNG is a good alternative, but relying on it could have political and financial consequences. The earlier America First policies of the Trump administration made it clear that relying too much on the U.S. for essential supplies could lead to trade disputes or unilateral policy changes that could break energy agreements. There are also problems with logistics, like the need for more LNG infrastructure and price changes in the global LNG market, which make this shift even harder. The EU also has trouble balancing its energy security goals with its climate goals. The quick move away from Russian gas has made the EU rely more on coal and other non-renewable energy sources, which could slow down its move to green energy. This energy crisis shows how important it is to speed up investments in renewable energy and improve grid infrastructure to reduce reliance on energy from outside the EU. In conclusion, the EU must handle a dangerous energy landscape marked by geopolitical tensions. Because of unstable markets and limited infrastructure, the bloc's efforts to increase the variety of energy sources are admirable. However, to truly become energy independent, it will need to keep investing, work together politically, and plan ahead so it doesn't get caught in the geopolitical ambitions of its suppliers. That's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If our content spoke to you or inspired you, please show your support by liking it and following to stay in touch with our community.